Oh, sure. Yep.
Okay. We are recording
and
now.
welcome to another episode of the Fuse Film Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Call, and we're still in a galaxy far, far away, but always near and dear to your hearts. And joining me, Mr. Vactor from the Vactorverse, and my good friend, Rob Keys. You know him as FailCube on social media, and he is the purveyor of all things ScreenRant.com. So if you hate that website, take it up with him. So, no, I'm just kidding. We love Screen Rant. We're so excited to have Rob here. We know how passionate, Rob, you are about Star Wars, and we know you've been traveling, maybe not to a galaxy far, far away, but we're glad you're at home, resting, and getting back into a good, solid routine. So thanks for coming up today, guys.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be resting at home and talking Star Wars again.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Rob, we are going to talk episode 3 today, but you weren't on our reaction show for the first 2 episodes. What'd you think? Give us a little recap of your initial thoughts of Ahsoka, and we'll get you caught up on our thoughts, and then we can dive into our episode 3 reactions and all that good stuff.
Sure, yeah. I'll say very briefly, it's good. It's refreshingly good compared to where I thought The Mandalorian left off. I feel like that series has been sort of downtrending in quality storytelling and its use of characters. And I didn't like Obi-Wan that much, and Boba Fett I think is one of the worst things from Star Wars ever. So it was nice to have a show that's pretty good and kind of fun. And more importantly, it's nice to have a show that tried to do something different. They are still relying on the volume a lot, which is unfortunate. There are some scenes that really hurt.
Oh, there was some
that.
like background scenes that were just really lame. Like in the beginning when she's kind of standing there, like getting ready to fight the robots, there was just some patchy CGI and stuff. Yeah, for sure.
That whole set with all the pillars, I can't believe they used that marketing so much because all the pillars are fake. It's like, to me, it looks like,
but it took like 12 minutes for each pillar to move. And so like you had to sit there and stare at it forever. So it's like, come on, move on with it.
That was tough.
Isn't great anyway. Yeah.
On the flip side, there's some details they're getting right. For example, I love the interior of her Jedi shuttle. Like just the simple detail of like the table coming out of the floor and it goes back in. They can use it as a training area. Like those things. I'm like more of those practical, simple, sensible designs that make me feel like this is a real place and a very functional place. Even in episode 3, like you see the walls open up and it's full of like training weapons. I'm like, that's cool. More of that, more practicality, right? And
there is a term, and I can't remember the name of this term, and I'm going to find it one day. George Lucas coined this term, and I heard Gore Verbinski use it when he was describing world building for Pirates of the Caribbean, in that when you really focus on the details of something, it just creates something more immersive. And there's a consistency across all the mediums, right? And I feel like the volume, you lose some of that intimacy, right? Like people gave a lot of criticism to Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi for the green milk and some of those things. Like we get it, Luke's on a faraway planet, he's not in Scotland, right? But there's some things about that make sense, like to just, bring sort of this environment to it. The Gilroys did a great job in Andor. Like when he was on that planet with the different tribes and all that kind of stuff going on, like there was this feeling like this doesn't exist here, but it's something that we understand with tribal culture and stuff like that in our own world. So I can't remember the name of this term. I'm going to find it one day. I'll put it on our social media.
I'm very curious.
Yeah.
What you're describing, though, is to me actually one of the most important things about production design and direction and storytelling, because it has to be a real place. And to continue your Andor example, it's not just the tribes area. It's the interiors of every vehicle and every building they're in. And it's all their gear. It's how they pack their bags and take things out of it and open the thing and use the thing. It's all real. And I think we've lost that in some of these other Star Wars shows. And I'll say Andor's still the best at everything. But Ahsoka has little elements of that. So they're learning, I think, along the way. But the other thing I like about Ahsoka is how it brings some of our fan favorites from Rebels into live action, mostly successfully, and teasing some more to come. Like I can't wait to see the Ghost and more of Chopper and Ezra and who knows who else. So that part was kind of fun. But yeah, to my main point, I like that they're doing something new in this big tease of the galactic map, and we're not just getting Thrawn back. We're going to a place we've never been. This galaxy is not just about that one place far, far away. There's so much more. And that's exciting because for the
there's
first
a galaxy
time,
far, 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 far away.
yeah, and a galaxy
Yeah.
beside a far, far, far. So that's
There's a
exciting.
galaxy very, very, very far away. Yeah.
I like when they break rules, break tradition, break the mold. They're trying to do something bigger that has real ramifications, assuming this is the beginning of something that they're going to explore for years to come. And knowing what they've announced on the film front, it's very possible at least one of those films will be dedicated to this new area, maybe, which is very exciting to think about. So that had me excited. It's also shot differently. I like how we're not in Tatooine. We're going to different places. These new characters like Balin and Shin feel like cool new types of characters, and like the way they talk is different. I like that. It felt different. But it's still in between Mandalorian and Andor for me. But still, to me, it's a step in the right direction.
That's awesome. So to kind of recap some of my initial reactions from the first 2 episodes, I was very neutral. I didn't hate it. There wasn't anything that really blew me away. The attractiveness of this series to me is not only that it's basically a season 5 to Rebels, but that there's a promise of a premise where you have a good savior and a bad savior, and they're off somewhere in a place that we don't know. And there's this race to try to get them by both sides. And I love that idea of a story. And to me, that's the most compelling thing. The first episode didn't really dive as much into that premise as I would have liked. It was essentially one episode just broken out into 2 parts is what it felt like. And you had the map MacGuffin that, generated a lot of criticism as it related to seen it, done it, what did J.J. Abrams do this again, things like that. So it did lend itself to some pacing challenges, but overall, I thought the performances were really good. I think Rosario Dawson's getting a little too much flack from some Ahsoka fans that are missing Ashley Eckstein's sort of upbeat positivity to the character. But I feel like that's just going to happen a little bit when you're translating an animated character into live action. I feel like there's just this trick that unfortunately happens where you have to almost kind of change the tone a little bit to make it feel more adult because it's more realized, I guess. I don't know. But I also think it may serve her character a little bit, right? She's been through a lot. She's seen a lot. There's been a lot of war that she's been through. And so that was just one of my reactions about her as a character and kind of where she's at this point in her life. There's obviously this backstory with her and Sabine that we're learning about, and we learn a lot in this episode 3, which we'll dive into in a little bit. But those are really my initial reactions. I'm kind of the same way. I felt like it was a good, happy medium between what was great about Andor and what's kind of been lost with Mandalorian over the last season. So, but definitely not a Boba Fett, definitely not a secret invasion. My last point that I made was, and I'm going to ask you this question, Rob, because I'm very curious what you think. Do you think Luke Skywalker is going to come in at some point? And here's why I asked that. I made the point on the last episode that this almost feels like in the Marvel version of like a cosmic level thing, whereas like Mandalorian and Andor would be more like a street level type stuff going on. So given that this is a pretty big deal, I feel like the biggest deal in the galaxy, who's in his prime right now, Luke Skywalker, should show up. And our guest, Mark Vibert from the Holdopod, had an interesting theory where he thinks that the scenes from Boba Fett are actually scenes that we haven't caught up to yet in the timeline for Ahsoka. Like this is all kind of happening somewhat non-linearly, which I thought was an interesting point. So maybe she will go recruit Luke to help with this cause. So
I hadn't thought about that. In terms of the timelines, I think we all just assumed it was going chronologically almost, especially the way they play with Boba Fett, filling in gaps between. I say filling in gaps, really breaking the continuity a little bit of where Mandalorian and Grogu's journey was supposed to go. But to your main question about Luke, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In a way, I think Filoni is doing his own. He really is. He's doing his own episodes. 7, 8, 9. because you have that time now. And yeah, this is a galactic level threat. It involves the entire New Republic. It involves an endless supply of Force users. This whole franchise seems to do that. Everyone survived Order 66. And so Luke would be a part of that. Why wouldn't?
I mean,
wouldn't
not just
he?
Luke, but I feel like Leia, like there may be, and all sensitivity to the loss of Carrie Fisher, it's, you know, to sort of salt that with AI and, you know, deep fake technology and all that kind of stuff. Like, I do feel like she was missing as a seat at the table in this episode 3, where Hera is trying to convince the politicians to help out with this impending war, as she says. And to not have Leia there just felt weird to me. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this, but that is one thing that stuck out as a reaction to this episode is, you know, Leia should be there, right? Like, she is the politician of all politicians besides Mothma that should be involved in these kind of conversations. I can understand maybe Han. We know a little bit about his backstory, you know, from Force Awakens, that, you know, there's some marital challenges and things like that going on, things with Kylo. So maybe he's off doing his own thing. So I don't know if we're there yet in this particular point in time, but not having Leia there was interesting. And so again, this having these OG characters showing up, I just think is an interesting conversation.
Yeah. It's interesting with that in mind to think about the bigger picture of it all. This really is the beginning of what's going to be a trilogy of stories. Trilogy is no longer a traditional 3 movies, right? It's a bunch of shows, a movie, a bunch of shows, and maybe Filoni gets a sequel to his thing. But he is going to build there are a bunch of shows that him and Jon Favreau and Kathleen Kennedy have formed. But it's still the beginning of that. Ahsoka could have a season 2, and there could be another show of another character or group of characters in between there. And you're right, the Star Wars universe does involve, at this point, maybe is Ben a newborn in this era? Like, we don't even know in terms of timeline, right? He would be just a few years old if he's alive right now, right?
Yeah.
So they are together. We know that from reading the Bloodlines book, and if you read the books as well, like in Chewie still around off course. So yeah, it makes you wonder if this show and whatever comes next are building towards Dave Filoni's Star Wars movie that would collect these characters, but it would be weird not to have Luke and Han. And also, you raised a good point about the politicians of it all. We, in the Filoni universe, outside of some weird Mandalorian stuff, we don't get a real look at the political landscape, like how central the New Republic is versus these Imperial remnants. It's very strange. We get like weird glimpses, and it's inconsistent at times, depending on if you're following Moff Gideon versus some other one. It's very confusing. So we will need a clearer picture of that at some point as well, which would inherently, in my mind, would involve Leia, right? So it's a good point. It's funny. We're so in the weeds of these little characters of trying to bring into live action, you forget about the bigger picture of it all, which is still, in a way, the Skywalker saga characters, right? So
absolutely, Justin, we've been keeping your mic quiet. Let's get it heated up here. Vactor, give us a quick recap on your initial reactions of the first 2 episodes, initial reaction of episode 3, and just some of the things we've been talking about.
I was also kind of lukewarm on the first 2 episodes. It was right in the middle for me. It wasn't outstanding and it wasn't terrible, but I was thinking about and I think Secret Invasion, Kevin, you mentioned this, had the same thing for me, where I'm going along with it and I'm like, oh wait, this will lead to something, right? This will lead to something. Something will happen. And so I was kind of giving it the benefit of the doubt. And then when I got to the end, it was like, oh, well, what was the point of all that? I'm hesitant for these Ahsoka episodes. I'm hoping at episode 8, I'm like, oh yes, all of the kind of slowness and the taking our time is leading up to something. And it's not just, okay, these episodes were filler. And then really we only had this 2 episode arc, but we stretched it out to 8 episodes. That's what I'm kind of hoping, because these the first 2 that we talked about, and then this third one, there's little sprinklings of things that I'm interested in, but it's not the entire episode is like, yes, this is from start to finish. Everything is go, go, go. It feels like there's things that are just stretching for time in certain areas. So I'm hoping we get something, because we're almost to the halfway point of the 8 episodes, and it still feels like we're in the first 5 minutes of a movie. Like, I just feel like there's more, and I'm excited because, like everyone on this podcast, I just love spending time in the Star Wars universe, and so I'm having a good time as I'm going along, but when I'm stopping to think about the story and where it fits in with the broader Filoni universe, I'm just not sure where this is leading to. I am hopeful that once we get to the Filoni movie, we're gonna look back and say, "Oh yeah, everything from Mando to Boba Fett to Ahsoka, everything fits into this giant puzzle. It all leads up to something, and we were all happy about it." Because I also feel like we're in this, like the J.J. Abrams, like episode 7, between episode 7 and 8 period. We're like, "Yeah, that was great. Episode 7, we all had fun," and we don't know what's ahead. We don't know episode 9 is coming in our minds. We don't know that Rise of Skywalker is about to disappoint a lot of us. So I just want this to lead to something. That's where I'm at right now. And I want Sabine's journey to be worth it. And the reason Ahsoka is taking her on as a Padawan and training her, I want this all to lead to something. And actually, episode 3, I'm really feeling like this is the Sabine show, and Ahsoka's kind of having the, let's say, the Obi-Wan in episode 4 role, and Sabine has the Luke role. It feels like this is her movie, and Ahsoka's just there to for background and for color, and like, yeah, she's the old mentor, but I want, if it's called Ahsoka, I kind of want some more Ahsoka. So that's kind of where that was where my episode 3 thoughts were.
Yeah, I think we're going to get some, I'm hoping, I say we're going to, like, I know, I hope we're going to get some more character driven elements related to the title character Ahsoka. Judging by one of the trailers with Hayden Christensen's voice as Anakin, it feels like we're probably going to get some kind of flashback deal, which is going to, like Lost did, right? It's going to help push, parallel where the character is now to where they were and that kind of stuff, which is a classic storytelling trope now. So, I feel like we're going to get some of that. But I find Sabine equally interesting. One thing, and we'll go ahead and get into reactions now. One thing that I didn't know, and maybe I knew this and I just had forgotten. So, internet, if I said something to the contrary, I'm admitting as a man that I am wrong. I always believed that the Jedi, the Sith and stuff, like there was always this subsect of the galaxy that were force sensitive. But I was corrected wrong. And actually Rian Johnson was right. I think there was a lot of criticism coming out of The Last Jedi. What do you mean everybody has the Force? What are you talking about? But you go back to that line from Obi-Wan in A New Hope. The Force is what binds us, surrounds us, penetrates us. It's in all living things. And there's an interview with George Lucas, and I heard somebody on this channel, I think it's Star Wars Theory on Instagram that I follow. And he was like, look, these aren't rules that Disney came up with. These aren't rules that Filoni came up with. These are Lucas rules about the Force, that it exists in everyone. Now, apparently, there's people more talented, people that have the ability to manipulate the Force in ways that can benefit them. And that's where you start getting these religions and these cults and these things like that. But technically everybody has the Force within them. I guess it's, this universe's version of God or whatever it is. And so as I was in the last podcast, I questioned that as it related to Sabine, like as there was no sort of reference that she was Force sensitive in the Rebels series. And I was like, wait a minute, did I miss something here? Did something happen in this backstory that we haven't seen yet with Ahsoka? And here now in episode 3, she's training. And I love the scene where she's sitting there at the table and she's trying to force pull the cup over to her and it's not working. And so you have this person who just hasn't figured out how to tap into this Force, to communicate with it, to use it in a way that somebody like Ahsoka or Anakin or whoever. I feel like we're getting into, some Scientology type aspects of things. Like, everybody's got different levels, level 10, level 8, whatever. But anyway, that was just one of my initial reactions watching this. Was I feel like I had to reground myself in some of what the original concept of the Force was from George Lucas. So I'll stop there. Any comments from the peanut gallery?
Yeah, I do. So it's a weird semantics thing. I think the way it was used in the original Star Wars, it's just saying like all life is attached to the Force. Fine. But I do agree with you that there needs to be some sort of Force sensitivity to defy the other rules of the galaxy, such as gravity. So like not every person or creature can do telekinesis. That wouldn't make sense. This world would be goofy. But sure, everything is attached to the Force, but the Force doesn't make decisions. Otherwise there wouldn't be all this evil. And we can argue all day what balance means. But I think you're right. I think this ties into some of the things we saw in Rogue One. And I did the junket for that one. And I remember talking to Donnie Yen, who's one of my favorite actors ever. And his character, if you watch the movie, is seemingly Force sensitive. He is a blind warrior monk who can see things before they happen. He can move and predict, and he's stronger than normal for what you consider a normal human to be of that size. And I asked him, I said, is your character Force sensitive? And he gave me a similar answer saying, no, I think the Force does run through all life. And he, through his practice of religion and skills and what he's honed in on over the years, is more in tune with that. So he's more connected to that. And so maybe that's where you kind of bridge the gap between someone like Sabine having Mandalorian talents and just she needs more skill and more focus to tap into some of that. But I do think you're right, though. I think she does have to have some Force sensitivity. Otherwise, if you go up with someone like Shin, who does use the Force, you lose because they swing a lightsaber. You cannot block it because they are stronger than you. They push you back with the Force. They hold you down with the Force. You need to be sensitive to the Force to resist that and to reflect that into combat, that I think. So, I mean, I'm sure everyone has their own interpretation of this, but I think if Sabine had no talent at all, she should be destroyed immediately. The same way I think this may come up in the future when we talk about characters like Finn. Finn broke free of the brainwashing like many other stormtroopers because of the Force. And so I think he, in some ways, probably Force sensitive. Because he held his own a little bit against Kylo Ren with a lightsaber, and he shouldn't have if he was quote unquote a normal person, right? So, for whatever that's worth. But
I feel like there was a deleted scene on Rise of Skywalker where he was going to tell Rey he was Force sensitive or something like that. But I'm with you, Rob. I think I look at it like professional sports. Like everyone can pick up a basketball or pick up a hockey stick, but not everybody is great at doing those things. And so there's people that spend more time training and they have natural athletic abilities versus some people don't have the natural athletic ability and they don't train. So it's like when you get the combination of people who are naturally athletic and they put the time in and they work on their craft, that's when you get these great, athletes. So I think that's the way that I look at the Force specifically. Everyone has it. Everyone can use the Force, but some people are stronger. And that's what the Jedi are picking up on when they're finding the younglings. It's like, oh, okay, this person is strong with the Force. So I can see that potential. I will train them. And then, so I think that's the way that we have to look at it. But yeah, Kevin, it's very interesting along the way. I think, and Lucas has been fluid on a lot of things that he said, oh yeah, I always thought it was going to be that way. And brother and sister kissing. Yeah, that was normal. I approved that from day one.
Of course.
He had a lot of quotes about the Force that are coming up now. And that interview that you said, or the clips that you said on Instagram. And then also I was just in my own kind of research, I was looking at, there was quotes that he made on the first one on episode 4 and on Return of the Jedi, where he was talking about how everybody can do it. It's just the Jedi who take the time to use it. Kind of like yoga, he said. If you want to take the time, I'm reading a direct quote here. If you want to take the time to do it, you can do it. But the ones that really want to do it are the ones who are into that kind of thing. So unfortunately, I don't have it memorized, but.
Yeah, but it's weird because it's not that simple. It's because this is such an extreme version of that. Because we are saying people who have in some way mastered or on their way to mastering the Force, they are again, defying gravity. They can fly and flip and pull things with their mind. They can persuade people with their mind. This is not just like, I'm really good at sword fighting or fencing. It's like, no. You are a god amongst the regular peasants or whatever. You know what I mean? That's the thing. And that's why I think people get really held up on someone like Rey, because it's like, Rey is a nobody. What's her background? Are we going to explore this or not in episode 8? And she's not a normal person. She's not an everybody person. She is inherently more powerful than any other being we have seen in years, right? She can do things, incredible things with her mind and with her physicality. So that's not just because of practice. She is inherently extremely force sensitive. And of course, they gave us some wild reason why that may be in episode 9. But she was not just a person with skills. She was extremely force sensitive, right? Naturally. So, it's an interesting thing. It's tough because the fantastical element and themes of Star Wars don't allow for a scientific or precise quantifiable answer to this.
Right.
Which is
that was the thing with when midichlorians came up, and everybody was like, no, I don't want a scientific reasoning for the Force. I want the Force to just be this, this idea and this mindset, and I don't want to have the scientific. But I think the good thing about the prequels was you could have your cake and eat it too. So like the people who wanted the scientific explanation, okay, here it is. But then the people who don't want that can also continue their, okay, this is my interpretation of the Force. So you can have it both ways. But I like thinking about this type of stuff. I like kind of pondering it. And Sabine is a great example of this. Of okay, she was in Rebels. They tried to train her with Kanan, and they had a little bit of like dark saber stuff. But
yeah,
I'm interested to see where this story goes. I'm glad that it's Filoni who is continuing. And Kevin talked about it a little bit earlier. I think I do look at this as Rebels season 5. And for me, that is enjoyable. For, let's say, my wife who hasn't watched Rebels, I'm curious. She enjoyed the first 2 episodes. I haven't shown her the third one yet, but I'm curious how she is going to interpret these characters, because I don't think this is the same Ahsoka in those shows, Clone Wars and Rebels, as we're seeing in this live action version. And I want there to be a specific call out of that. Like, I'm different because this happened to me. I went through the world between worlds or whatever. Give me a reason for Ahsoka being so laid back and so like it's not a little, like it's an extreme laid back or reserved. And I like that. I mean, I like Rosario Dawson. I like her as an actor, and I like the choices she makes. But for this character who we've already seen and has been established in the canon of she is one way, I want her to have a journey and to have an arc and an evolution, and give me a reason for, and not just, oh, she's completely different now. She's not like she was before, and I'm not going to tell you why.
So one thing that I thought about, and this was after we recorded our reaction episode, and my wife, similar to yours, is coming into this very cold, like never watched an episode of Rebels, but she was interested. She's like, it looks neat. It's something we can watch together, that kind of thing. And Star Wars, if you think about it, A New Hope, we were sort of coming into a story within this galaxy that had all this context that we hadn't seen before. We're coming into this galactic civil war. Wait a minute, who's the guy with the dark helmet and the dark cape? And wait a minute, who's that girl at the beginning? Like, so there was all those questions that the movie somewhat revealed and somewhat answered and it didn't disrupt the film of what made Star Wars so great. So I feel like Star Wars has always been this sort of, journal that we're opening and coming in,
right,
and being able to read these characters. And at this particular point in time, this show does a fairly decent job of helping somebody like our wives get into it without having the 4 seasons of Rebels and 6 seasons or whatever of Clone Wars build up to this character Ahsoka. Because my wife is like, well, wait a minute, that's the girl I saw in that episode of Mandalorian and and Book of Boba Fett. So there was some context she had, but not a lot of the backstory. So I do find that interesting. I want to go ahead and move into, guys, around the horn. So let's take a quick I want to hear everybody's episode 3 reaction. So, Rob, let's start with you. The good, the bad, the ugly, and then just sort of what you are excited about moving forward and what you hope they don't do.
Yeah, I think Vactor alluded to one of my main complaints with episode 3, and it ties into the first 2 episodes. The first 2 episodes, when they came out the same night, worked as like, this is a good starting point. If 2 episodes felt like one juicy episode, and it moved pretty fast. We saw a lot of scenes, we met a lot of the characters, they brought everyone back, and it was fulfilling enough as like, this is the starting point. Episode 3, which in my head is sort of like the second episode, feels like a quarter of that. It's a short episode. I think it reigns in at 32, 34 minutes or something. But it's really, it's sort of like 3 sequences when you really break it out, and not that much happens. So it feels like a real filler episode. I really do wish, for the benefit of Star Wars and the audience, that this was paired with another episode. This felt like the first half of an episode. And we can talk all day about binging versus weekly releases, but this was not satisfying on its own, just because it wasn't enough there to wait a week in between.
I agree.
To the episode itself, it had some cool things. We alluded to the Ahsoka training Sabine again. That was kind of a cool sequence because it was very character focused, character driven. We finally got a little bit into the nitty gritty of what happened to the relationship and where they need to go next, and training and what it means to be a Force user. And you get the classic helmet on, close your eyes, find me. It's kind of fun. It's enough. Even though it's a trope we've seen, it felt satisfying. And then we get a bit of a space Star Wars dogfight with some interesting new vessels. Kind of neat. I'm a little curious why Shin and the questionable or curious Merrick character are flying such awful spacecraft.
You mean Starkiller? Yeah.
Yeah, Starkiller or Ezra or whatever the theory is. Intentionally unnamed, hidden from the audience character who like selectively shows up and does not in sequences. It's just, again, storytelling, guys. Storytelling. You can't. That character is literally a gimmick that exists when he needs to, and it's just a solid. By the way, I'll show you guys before we recorded, I built a Lego. I have a bunch of Lego ships from Ahsoka. So I built the shuttle, which is the main sort of ship, and I built there's a 2-pack which has these fighters I'm talking about, the one Shin flies, which feels very World War II Mustang dogfight vehicle, and I have the E-wing, which is in the first episode of Ahsoka, which to me, I think every time I talk to you guys about Star Wars, I reference video games. Last time we talked about X-Wing Alliance and that franchise, going back to the N64 days. For those of you who know, the first Rogue Squadron introduced the E-Wing in its final mission set 6 years later with Wedge Antilles. And now they brought it into canon live action in Ahsoka, and I built that Lego ships.
Nice.
But one of these kits came with Merrick, and it's just like a blank face under the helmet. It's just literally a black little piece of Lego you put on there under the helmet. And I'm like,
That's
really? That's so bad. Not even Lego knows. I thought that was really funny. But yeah, it is funny how like their little ships are worse than TIE fighters. They have no shields. They're very short range. They fire these little tiny like machine gun type lasers that do 0 damage against a shuttle. But
it kind of makes sense though. I mean, because we're in that kind of remnant, piece of the Imperial Galactic Empire, so they wouldn't have access to a lot of maybe some of these really nice things that they're used to.
You know what?
So,
I would agree with you if we weren't defending a giant intergalactic space relay that has multiple Super Star Destroyer engines. I feel like somehow Baylan and Shin would have somewhat more advanced mercenary gear than these unshielded things with 4
maybe they didn't want to draw a lot of attention to themselves. Maybe that's the thing.
Yeah. Does that ring draw attention?
Well, you know what I mean. Like something.
You're
not
right. You're not wrong.
Whatever.
Look, it's a merchandising play is what it is. But yes. Sorry, Vactor, were you gonna say something there?
I was gonna say real quick that scene, which I liked.
It's fun.
All of the space battles in this, but you knew everyone was surviving because it was Ahsoka, Sabine, Shin, and Merrick. Everybody was surviving. I think there was the unnamed mercenaries. Like, oh, okay, he's expendable. But we knew everybody was getting out of this.
Of course.
We've also seen the clips of them on the planet and Shin and Sabine having the rematch. So there wasn't a lot of stakes for this battle or this fight. And like Rob said, I felt like this was specifically filler to get to the next episode. And it wasn't, okay, there was a story point that we needed.
Yeah. Virtually nothing happened in the sequence because you said there were no stakes. It was a visual and the setup of X amount of fighters versus a shuttle with a gun turret. We've seen that before.
Right.
A lot of what Filoni does is rebuild scenes we've already seen because he thrives and depends on nostalgia, which is unfortunate. And while he has introduced new characters, he falls into this rhythm of like, he takes it too literally, where like, George Lucas would say, this is a rhythm. It's like, it comes in threes and this and that, where we got,
It's like poetry.
It's
It
poetry.
rhymes.
You see the same themes again and again, but he's like literally shot for shot rebuilding scenes. And of course, not to harp on the first 2 episodes, but there are 10 sequences, which are shot for shot, angle for angle. Hey, remember this thing from Rebels? Where it's it's Kanan doing the thing with the lights coming through the window. It's these characters walking this way. It's we get it. We've seen Rebels. Tell a new story. And my beacon of hope was the new galaxy. And my beacon of hope in this episode was we're building this new thing to take us somewhere we've never been before and maybe explore lore and unravel lore we haven't seen before. But that was okay. It was kind of fun to watch. Not enough. But what really fell apart for me this episode was the senator sequence. I think this is an example of horrendous writing. The way these senators talk feels like high school fan film. And there's some genuine talent on screen during the sequence. And it was almost embarrassing to watch this. And then on top of it being so poorly acted and written, the whole conceit of the scene is Harris, who, by the way, is an extremely accomplished, extremely loyal, extremely confident, maybe the one person you want to listen to about galactic threats. And these 5 Mothma and 4 nobodies are completely ignoring her, which is so frustrating given what we've seen from this universe so far. They're still not believing that. Fine.
Right.
But in that conversation, Hera never mentioned the most important thing. They just uncovered traitors on Corellia. They successfully stole a super Star Destroyer engine and got away with it. Why was that not part of this conversation? We need this fleet to go here because why? She's like, oh, Thrawn, something. No, they just stole the biggest engine ever and took it there. We need to go figure out what's going on. And that never came up.
Yeah.
So did they forget
I
their
feel
own
like
story?
No, I'm with you. And I feel like she was on the verge of possibly bringing it up, but that one senator kind of shut her down as it related to, all the Imperial remnants, we've brainwashed them and they're all part of the Republic now, or whatever throwaway line that she had. I can't remember, but I feel like you're right. Terrible writing. That was the part of the episode that I hated the most was the political stuff. Number one, I feel like it's a waste of Hera's character. I don't want to see her trying to politicize things or be in front of I want her and Chopper in a ship. I want her dogfighting. I want her doing those things. I think she's just better served that way, as well as being sort of a leader, helping Sabine and things like that. I think the whole episode is wasting the Hera character, Elizabeth Weinstead's acting skills, etc., because you're putting her in a scene with really bad writing. And so I'm totally with you on that. And yeah, that's all I really have to say about that one. I will say one thing, the Asian actor who was very vocal, I can't remember his name, but he's one of the senators. Somebody wrote online that I think he has a lineage of the Hosnian Prime, which is what gets completely knocked out in the First Order attack and Force Awakens. So, if you don't like that guy, he's going to get his due later.
Actually, that character shows up in Star Wars Resistance later on, and he's a more competent character. No. Yeah, that's the kids' animated show.
Son, his son is the main character in Resistance. So he does survive.
But that was what I'm saying though. But that before Resistance, like, is Resistance after Force Awakens, or is that?
Yes.
Right?
Because like Oscar Isaac is in it as Poe and stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but I thought that was pre Force Awakens, like kind of like he
survives. Because actually,
I feel like it's
in Resistance, there's a scene where he's talking, and his son is like, "Oh, you survived Hosnian Prime." So there is a scene specifically addressing that.
Wow. Well, shows you what I know. I didn't watch Resistance. There was nothing about that show that interested me. So that shows you exactly where I'm on that. But yeah, just had to call that out. Anyway, the political scenes I think were the biggest waste of the entire episode. Totally agree on the filler. I did like the action though. I liked the dog fighting. It's been a while since I've seen good dog fighting in Star Wars. So I was very much appreciative that we had that, even if it was almost a shot for shot remake of New Hope, just with different actors, and you had female actors this time instead of Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill. But just like the girls firing at the ships, and you got the mentor over there. I was almost expected to hear the "Don't get cocky, kid" coming out, but we didn't get that line relived.
Yeah.
I want more Baylan Skoll. Right now, Ray Stevenson, that character is arguably my favorite character, in the sense of I'm most interested in him, what his motivations are. We heard power was something that he mentioned in episode 2. What kind of power? Are we talking like what Palpatine said, like unlimited power, just like this massive just deluge of the Force and all that? Or is it something else? I've heard people write online, or read people writing online, that one of the big theories with him is that he's wanting to somehow get access to the way of the world so he can keep Order 66 from happening. I've seen that. My theory is that he simply just wants to bring the Jedi back in his own vision and view of what that is. I don't believe he's fully dark side. I think the best comparisons I've heard of this guy is he feels a lot like Count Dooku, where it's like this guy who's very jaded by the Jedi, very jaded by his own belief system, but he's not pure evil like a Palpatine or other characters like that. But yeah, overall I felt like the episode was good. I couldn't have said it better, Rob. I would have liked another one to follow, because now I have to wait until Tuesday evening to see what happens next.
Yeah, I think this is going to binge very well.
Yeah.
No matter where it turns out.
What's the most rewatchable scene for you guys?
In specifically episode 3?
Specifically episode 3. If you had to fire it up today, what would be like one of the scenes like, oh yeah, that's a great rewatchable scene. I could watch that again. Mine was Ahsoka on the ship outside with the lightsabers taking out the other ships. I just thought that was really cool. Not something you see a lot of in Star Wars. I know she's done it before in the Clone Wars, things like that. So it was very cool to see that in live action.
I like that.
Really like that.
Although, it's funny, I saw somebody online point out, if you did that in space, if you jumped, you wouldn't go back to the others. You would just keep going. Like if you jump in space, there's nothing pulling you back. So
this is a galaxy far away, people. It's got different rules. Yeah, she's got the Force. It's got different
Leia
rules. Let's come on.
Yeah, episode.
Also, that ship has a grav drive because it has gravity. So
maybe
you could play with that. And also, that ship is uniquely designed in terms it has that B-wing style S-foils where the whole wing rotates. So
right.
You notice when she jumps from wing to wing, it's kind of rotating, which is kind of a cool effect. But I mean, you can easily plot your way around that in Star Wars.
Yeah, her custom space suit with the helmet. I thought that was fun.
Which is
I thought the helmet fit her hair tails and all that kind of stuff really well. I was like, wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, look, to your point earlier, Kevin, if this was a real Ahsoka show and they lived up to the title, I wanted to see her go to the bathroom and put that thing on. I want to see her zipping it around her tails, and it's like, show me the getting dressed soon.
I was thinking about that when I was watching it. I was like, yeah, wait a minute. And this suit looks pristine.
If this were Andor, he'd go into the bathroom and put that on, and then go out the door and get on the roof. I want to see that. You know what I mean? Whereas, I will say
there would be a compelling scene where it's like, I hate getting in this damn thing. Like it's painful, So.
I wouldn't mind an extra 3 minutes of runtime of her going to thing, putting her boots on, getting her lightsabers ready, putting a suit, and then going out the door, and you see this cool vista of like the things are following, and she climbs onto the wing. That's those details are missing because this really is a universe of shortcuts when it comes to the flowing universe.
Right.
And a lot of things that happen in Ahsoka in all 3 episodes are happening off screen. There's a huge focus on Sabine. Ahsoka just goes places, and we find out in dialogue, or we have to connect the dots ourselves afterwards why she's there. It's not following her journey. She's just there, and she's treated almost in some scenes as a background element or in service of other characters. So it doesn't, you're right, it has not lived up to the title. And I think this is just the way they're not really focusing or successfully delivering, certainly not in pace, any of the character arcs, except Sabine, sort of, right?
Right.
All these things are just there, and then they're not there, and they're there, and we can joke about Merrick all day, but it applies to everyone, to
Right.
Balin, to Elsbeth. You know what I mean? So that's frustrating.
That's what I mean by I hope this leads to something, because there's all of those things you just said. I'm like, yeah, I'm interested on Balin's backstory. I'm interested on Hu Yang. I'm interested on all of these different pieces, but am I going to be satisfied? And when episode 8 comes out, let's come back to this and say, hey, did all this lead to something, or was it just filler and nice looking visuals? So that's what I want. That's what I'm curious what's going to happen.
I think the thing that I am most hopeful for, and I think I asked you this question, Rob, so everybody comment on it here as we kind of close out the reactions of this third episode, but kind of what is our hope for the future of the series? And for me, I hope this continues to not only try to take a few risks and tread new ground. This new galaxy far, far away is very interesting. Being able to, tell something that's between now Force Awakens and Return of the Jedi, that's closer to that era of Return of the Jedi, and this remnant of Imperial and the struggles of the New Republic. Like, I feel like this is a more interesting piece of Star Wars galaxy history than maybe where we were pushed into in the quote sequel trilogy. And so I hope they continue to do that, pave new ground, take some risks, make it interesting, and yes, focus on the characters too. That's critical. Push Ahsoka to the next level. What choices is she going to have to make in this series? I would love it if Sabine ends up starting to find power, and somehow that puts her into the dark side of the Force. Her last name is Wren. Is there a connection between Sabine Wren and the future Knights of Ren that we might get that explanation for going into this future of the Star Wars galaxy? That would be my only last comment, is like it or love it or hate it, Star Wars is always going to have to continue to answer its own questions. And there's so many questions from the sequel trilogy that I feel like now there's somewhat of a responsibility for Filoni, Favreau, and whoever else is kind of writing in this era to have to figure out answers for. How did Palpatine return, or how is he going to return? What's the strategy and the story there outside of a throwaway line by Poe Dameron? So that's what I hope happens. And if it enhances the sequel trilogy and makes it slightly better, then hey, that's not a bad thing either. I actually will applaud that, right? But right now, everything we've gotten in Star Wars, there's so many highs and very many lows. There's not a lot of just good. There's not a lot of balance, to use that pun. And so I want it to bring a little bit of balance to the Force as well. So those are kind of my final reactions, as well as just kind of my hopes for the series. But what do you guys think?
I think we're all going to be amongst the group of, we want to see something different. We want this new galaxy to mean something going forward and not just be a throwaway thing of just Ahsoka and we never hear about it again. We want new stuff in the Star Wars universe, new story opportunities to be told in this that unlocks the potential, and everyone else can pick up the ball and go from there. So playing with time, playing with the world between worlds, playing with this other galaxy, all of those things are what I really want to see. And if we can get some fun things like Luke thrown in there, hey, I'm all for that. If we can get some nice member berries and some good things that give us a good feeling, but also are telling a good story, then I'll be happy.
I'll tell you what I want most, and it has to do with stakes, which we talked about. Right now, It is unclear from an emotional standpoint what anyone is doing and why, other than the idea that there is a threat, we think, out there far, far away, like really far away. His name is Thrawn. He's bad because... Remember Rebels? Okay. Why is he a threat to us? He's in a different galaxy. You know what I mean?
Right.
So the what I thought the through point was let's get Ezra back. We're missing Ezra. We need our family back. But none of these characters are together. Hera's completely by herself with her son. Every other character's doing their own thing. So what are we doing? Is this whole show about getting Ezra back? Because they don't seem to focus on that much. And like you said, any individual sequence now suffers as a result. So we just watched a Starfighter sequence where they're trying to get this information, but no one cares. The Rebel fleet or New Republic fleet doesn't care. None of these named or faced characters are in danger. These weapons are useless. We saw that. It's kind of a joke. Whereas when I see Stellan Skarsgård driving a ship being chased by an Imperial interdictor in Andor, you're like, oh my God, this is crazy. He's being captured. Then we see this like beautiful sequence of him escape, and like you see the results of the Imperial officers. So they're like, oh, we're going to be killed for this because we failed. And you see him get away, and you know he's on a mission. He has to get here to get this information, and it's like everything matters. And Andor does that for everybody, even characters you meet for like 30 seconds on screen when they make a sacrifice play in a riot sequence. It feels so real, and you care. You're invested. Right now, the more I think about it, I'm not really invested in anyone other than I like Star Wars. These characters look cool. And you can look at the reactions online on Twitter. There are people who are like, Shin's my favorite character. She is Star Wars. I'm like, why? What has she done or said or fought for that's so awesome? And they're like, well, she orange lightsaber? It's like, what? It's like, that is not a good story or a good character. That's just a cool thing. I mean, she stabbed Sabine and failed to kill her. I guess that's cool. I guess. You know what I mean? There's nothing pulling anything emotionally through. And this is the thing, not to change topics, but James Gunn always talks about with these superhero and genre films. Like, they're making stories just to make stories because they have IP or they have characters or they have visual ideas, but there's no reason to connect through any of it. Like, you know what I mean? What are they racing to or from? Is there a timeline? Does it matter? Why aren't these characters? Who's in charge? It's just pieces of Star Wars that they think we like, and like you said, Vactor, right now it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And from Star Wars Celebration, when we got to interview the cast, and RIP to immensely talented Ray Stevenson. By the way, he said his characters are not what you think, because I'm the one that brought up the orange lightsaber thing. Everyone, by the way, argued with me that said they were red lightsabers. I said those are not red lightsabers; they're orange.
No,
so we asked
orange.
Dave, we asked everybody, and they said, "Oh, no one's asking about that." I'm like, "No, everyone's arguing." And he says, "Hang on, it's not what you think." And I think it goes beyond them just being mercenaries. So, Kevin, I think you're right. I think Baylan has a larger plan at play, because him just being, I want power, doesn't make any sense. That's just bad. Right. You know what I mean? But yeah, they haven't given us a reason. There's no threat. The main characters never seem to be in real danger. They don't even care about each other in the show, right? Like I said, New Republic's not helping out. There are other characters in the Rebels crew not there yet. One in particular who was teasing Mandalorian. So yeah, I don't know. I really need a reason to care other than I like Star Wars. I liked Ahsoka, because right now when you really break it down, it's actually kind of not good. But there are a lot of things I love, and I'm hyped about things that could happen. Will they deliver?
Going back to
I don't know.
Going back to your reaction about the political scene, like, what would it, like, if Gilroy was handling this, and like, here I am trying to even remotely put myself in his shoes, which is ridiculous. Yeah. So forgive me, world. But I feel like had that been his scene, it would have been totally different. Number one, it would have been a bunch of holograms. There would have been some like backroom stuff going on. There literally would have been probably a moment where Hera would be like potentially fired from the New Republic. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what are you talking about? Like, we know you're a hero, we know you're a general, but like, you're on thin ice right now. You know what I mean? Like, there would have been, like, you start doing those kind of things, it paints these scenes differently, and it brings, like you said, these very real life stakes. Like, if anybody who's ever been in a situation where you've had to face politics and there's a risk there where you could lose your job or lose your life or something that you care about, it changes the whole tenacity of the scene, and people feel that, right? Like, there's not a lot of that right now. Like, even when Sabine was fighting Shin in the first episode, like, it was kind of like, oh, she was just there, so like there's gonna be a throwdown, but like there just wasn't any like my wife even was like, well, she's gonna die, so that's great.
Well, it's funny because
like, she thought
we had already seen Sabine with short hair in the trailers. Like, we knew she was going to survive. Obviously, your wife didn't know because she hadn't seen the trailers, but there was no stakes to that. But real quick, before we wrap up, I wanted to say, Rob, one thing I mentioned on the episode when you weren't here was Shin gave me very much Darth Maul vibes from episode 1, and exactly what you just said. Why do we care? That's how we felt about Darth Maul in episode 1. Why do we care? Everybody's like, "Oh, he looks cool. He had a great lightsaber fight." But there was no backstory. There was no meat, and we got that later on in the comics and the Clone Wars. Like, his character got filled in a little bit, but Shin right now is where Darth Maul was in episode 1, where it's like, oh, she looks cool, but why do we care about her?
It's the one difference is that Maul posed a real threat and killed Qui-Gon, which set up the whole Obi-Wan story. And you're like, oh my God, this is something different. This is serious. And he was an apprentice to something bigger. And in this case, the something bigger is Balin, but not really. It's Morgan. No, not really. It's Thrawn, I think. and by the way, when we spoke to Mars, he said, again, at Celebration back in April, he said, you're not even going to know what Thrawn's doing until the very last episode. So I think this is all just set up to what
that tracks.
So I feel like they're delaying the inevitable. And so far, weeks in, and several seasons of Mandalorian in, we don't know why he's a threat or what he's even doing. Because the worst thing possible, what if he just shows up and he's got a fleet of giant flying triangles full of people you've never met or care about, and they're going to blow stuff up or something? Like, what? Who cares? There has to be something interesting. So I'm hoping they pull something more interesting from new lore or Legends lore from that other galaxy, and maybe it has to do with the Force and everything else. But I don't know. Right now, it's the
Yushin Vong. If for all you EU fans out there, no, I'm kidding.
Everybody is saying episode 5 is going to be something major because it's supposedly has the longest runtime, and Filoni is directing it. So everybody is saying that's where either Ezra's going to appear or that's where like the story is going to change. So we'll see. We still have this week's episode 4 coming up until we get there. But good.
This week, I think the rumor was because of the I forget whether it was song titles or credits. I think Anakin's flashback would happen in episode 4.
Okay,
and if that tracks, episode 5 is what you're saying. We finally get Ezra back or flashbacks to that or something. So
yes,
so
it's building. It's building.
Yeah.
Which Hayden was the best part of Obi-Wan.
Yep.
Well, Rob, thank you for coming on today, giving us your reactions, your thoughts on everything Star Wars, as well as, of course, Ahsoka. Just give us a quick bite, Rob, where people can find you online, what you're writing about these days. Yeah.
So I think you mentioned up front, I can't change it now, but I am FailCube on Instagram and Threads, and occasionally Twitch and YouTube, but not really active these days. And then I am Rob_Keys. That's KEYES on Twitter / It's Twitter. That's where I'm at. And then, of course, ScreenRant.com. I've got some exclusives coming up this week. Actually, I think I have a Star Wars exclusive this week on the 24th coming out. And then I just got back from the Wheel of Time set, so I got a bunch of really cool on-camera interviews with the people behind that show. So lots coming up.
Nice.
That's awesome. Vactor, give us a little plug as well.
Yes, on YouTube, you can find me just youtube.com/Vactor or @Vactor. I'm doing the podcast over there called The Vactorverse, where I'm talking about comic books, Star Wars, everything in between. We were having actually a My Adventures with Superman wrap up. So if you're interested in the Superman anime, check out The Vactorverse on YouTube.
Love it. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, fellas. As always, the Force is strong with you both. The Force is strong with the audience as well. You heard it here, the Ahsoka reactions. And, we're going to continue to tune in. Let's see what Filoni does. So stay tuned as we dissect every episode, debate the theories, and, of course, celebrate all things Star Wars. May the Force be with you. This is a wrap. Thanks for joining. And remember, there's a little bit of Force in all of us. So next time, keep your lightsabers lit and your blasters to the ready.